We want to focus in on our bodies, but we have this immaterial part of us, this most precious part of us that we tend to sideline. And I think we got to put some energy and some thought and some strategy in addressing our souls.
Let's ditch the quick fix and dive into today's conversation. Welcome, everybody. I'm joined today by my good friend, Pastor Jake Magee. Pastor Jake has a master's in theology as well as a bachelor's of arts in philosophy. He has been married 26 years to his wife, Lori, and has 3 children, Haley, Ashley, and Noah. Pastor Jake enjoys playing the drums and guitar along with reading and racquetball. Part of Pastor Jake's personal health strategy includes biking, running, intermittent fasting, and when able, an occasional In-N-Out burger. Pastor Jake was born and raised in California and moved to Washington State in 2013 to become the senior pastor at Shelton First Baptist Church. Pastor Jake has been blessed with a great mind. He's a complex thinker and a great teacher. Today, we will have a conversation on the topic of spiritual health. Whether you've included spiritual health as part of your own personal health strategy or not, I hope you find today's conversation to be of great value and very informative. So welcome, Pastor Jake.
Well, Merry Christmas to you, Dr. Ernst, and to all of your listeners. And you kind of failed to mention the reason why In-N-Out Burger is only an occasional pleasure. It's now located, 4 hours away from where I live. Otherwise, it would be far more regular. So that's due to geography, not to self-discipline, just to let you know.
I appreciate that. We're going to dive into the topic of spiritual health, and I'm excited that you're going to lead us down this road a ways. And we need hours and hours and hours of time to really get into this conversation, but we can at least scratch the surface pretty well today. It's health. When we talk about health, it's very multidimensional, multifaceted. And I guess my first question is, what makes a person really healthy in this multifaceted way?
Yeah, well, I mean, you kind of said it, right? It can't be one thing. And when we simplify health, we lose it. And the hard fact of reality is being sick is easy. All you have to do is eat bad things and not work out and neglect your body. And that comes so easily. Health, on the other hand, it really is an enterprise. It is hard. It takes discipline. It's not going to be one thing. And there are going to be complexities involved in it that we have to acknowledge and honor in order to be a whole person. And I think what I want to add to this discussion, given the platform that you have as you address people's physicality, is I want to add to this discussion that health is also a spiritual. There's a physical dimension, and there is this indispensable spiritual dimension that I think is critical. And this is where I think the term holism is helpful. I'm a pastor, and you asked me on, and thank you so much. And I recognize that not all people are people of faith. So thanks for bearing with me. We do have this word in our faith called holiness. And all that means is that we are set apart for a purpose or for a design. And when we achieve that purpose or that design, then we are complete. We are healthy. We are whole. And I think that's multi-dimensional. I was at the gym last night, and I'm not a gym rat. In fact, when I go to the gym, I almost always only work out my chest and my arms, and I do cardio, and I always neglect my legs because I don't like that part. I don't want to experience the pain of working on my legs. And so as a result, come summertime, I look a little out of proportion. We have 2 months of summer here in the Northwest. And similarly, there are different parts of being a human, and we tend to focus in on some and we neglect others, and maybe even the most important areas. So I think we have to develop a strategy for all major areas of being human.
So let's have you kind of distinguish. You kind of hit the point there of, partialism versus holism. And if you could kind of create a little bit of an illustration that kind of really defines the difference in the human, as far as, it's not just the chest and the legs. There's many more areas, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly this is not an exhausted list. This is kind of
Correct.
just beginning. But, number one, we are embodied, right? And so I'm going to make the case, and I believe that we are not just body, we are soul and fleshed. We are created. We are created. Therefore, we have this, I think, this inseparable relationship or connection with our creator that needs to be addressed. We are personal. We are self-aware, introspective, moral agents who, before we have a relationship with any other creature, like, I got to deal with me, right? I have to live with me, and how I manage that relationship, I will either be more or less healthy. And then we're environmental. We're finite creatures. We inhabit space and time, a world with laws and boundaries that we have to know, acknowledge, and honor. Otherwise, we will face friction and flounder instead of flourishing. And so those are kind of the four major areas. And there's always these temptations or these leanings that we have to not recognize those areas.
And within those areas, kind of a quick, kind of detail on when you say we're embodied, kind of define that a little bit further.
I believe that we are soul and body. There is a immaterial part of us. These two parts depend upon each other. They're intimately bound together, and I'm going to be more or less healthy to the degree that I manage the relationship between those two. And I'll put it technically: consciousness and brain function. So we'll make that distinction, or let's make it even more broad: consciousness and overall physical health, though deeply interrelated, are not the same thing. Consciousness and its relationship with your brain is, as it turns out, one of those final frontiers that a lot of thinkers and a lot of researchers don't even have a paradigm to understand, to get their minds around. And I'll give you an example. I was reading a book 3 weeks ago by a professor of law and philosophy emeritus at New York University. His name is Thomas Nagel, and I studied him way back in the past. And I just picked up this book that he wrote in 2012, published by Oxford University Press. And the name says it all. And by the way, this guy is an atheist, and he does want to try to explain our consciousness physically. But here's the title of his book. Get this. It's called Mind and Cosmos: Why the Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. And the whole premise of the book is that it is almost impossible to imagine how we can reduce our mental states, our conscious states, to anything happening in the brain. So I'll give you the instance of my desire for In-N-Out Burger, which is regular and persistent, and unfortunately, it's far, far away. Take that desire. You are a doctor, and in principle, you could do the study, and we can develop the technology to map out every physical thing happening in my brain when I have that desire for an In-N-Out Burger.
Yes.
But unless I tell you that I have that desire, that I have that particular desire, unless I let you in, you will never know what I'm thinking. And that is kind of one of the most important parts of what's happening to me. And as you map out the brain, you will never find the I. You will never find the ego, the subject having these desires by examining synapses and axons and various regions of the brain. You only have access to my thought, the pink elephant that's in my mind right now, to the degree that I let you in. In other words, there's correlation between my conscious life in my brain states, but there is not identity. And this has led a lot of thinkers like Thomas Nagel, who's not a believer in God and does want to ultimately say that the universe is a product of accident. It's led him to throw his hands up in the air and say, I don't get it. And the relationship to health that I think is important is that we have to recognize that both our soul and our brains affect each other in these powerful ways, and being healthy respects that. We know, for example, that damaging the brain affects one's consciousness and memory and even a sense of personal identity. Right. But on the other hand, our consciousness can alter the physical structures of our brain. This is a term that we know as neuroplasticity. And I think in the West, we overemphasize the physical and we understate the spiritual when I believe that the soul is the more important part in this complex organism called the human being. Much like the paint of the Mona Lisa picture and its arrangement is more important than the canvas on which it is found.
Right. So so you're leading kind of in some of the challenges a person faces on understanding humanity and what it is to be human. And so that's kind of what we're touching on here a little bit. And if I can put that into, some of the plasticity that people seek in their physical health, that is what we do at the gym. We go to the gym, we lift the weights, we do cardio, we do all kinds of things. And we're trying to strengthening these pathways, which ultimately, causes the body to be reacting in the way that we constantly train it to react. And we're either subconsciously or consciously doing that with our brain, right?
Absolutely. And it's, we're in this time and it's a great, wonderful time in history where people are really paying attention to what they're putting in their body. Right. We want to know what the cow is eating, the cow that I'm eating. Right. We want to know where that chicken is raised. We want to know if the green beans that I'm consuming are genetically modified. We're really suspicious about anything that we can't trace to a healthy source. So we're really good at that physically, but I don't think we're as discriminating when it comes to that internal life, the condition of our soul. We have this Bible verse. It's Paul teaching this young pastor named Timothy, and he says, physical training is of some value. Of course it is. But godliness has value for all things, holding a promise both for the present life and for the life to come. And so, we want to focus in on our bodies, but we have this immaterial part of us, this most precious part of us that we tend to sideline. And I think we got to put some energy and some thought and some strategy in addressing our souls.
I think that, I love that verse too. And I appreciate that you share it. I look at, the challenge of a lot of people that want to be physically healthy, whether it's exercise, nutrition, whatever it is, what is the true value, especially if you're a person of faith and you're trying to wrestle with, hey, well, that scripture specifically, am I kind of overdoing it on the physical training kind of thing? Well, at the end of the day, there's studies out there that show that if you're more physically aware, nutrition, exercise, those kinds of things, it's going to increase your brain's capacity to function properly. And as you shared a few moments ago, there's a difference between brain function and consciousness. And I think it's a really good thing to continue to try to, delineate those and make distinction there. But at the end of the day, physical exercise is good, but it's very temporal. Our mind, we believe from the faith base that we have, like you said, we're created. We believe that we're created. And we also believe that we're created for eternity, not just a temporal existence. So I appreciate that. And another study I'll throw out there and maybe have you comment on it that, you and I have talked about before, that the brain basically gets, with no intent and some intent, at least 60,000 thoughts a day. And some estimate, over 100,000 thoughts a day. So, whether you're actively thinking or not, especially in today's culture with all the social media and all the technology, you are getting bombarded with information. And it'd be like going to the gym and lifting weights wrong, or going to the In-N-Out Burger all day long. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense there?
Oh man, and how relevant that is in the last couple of years, with with all of the challenges, the polarization that we've seen, people are inundated with so much from the outside, and it is affecting not just mind but also body. There's a term, and I don't know if it was coined during 2020 and 2021, but it's the term doom scrolling, and it's this act where we take our phone and we spend hours and we look at one bit of bad news after another, and as it turns out, neurologically, bad news actually stimulates your brains, because our brains are hardwired to spot threats, gather information so that we can protect ourselves. And so there's a surge of chemicals and of stimuli, and our brains can get addicted to that. And I think media, not maybe intentionally, they are leveraging that part of our brain that is attracted to the bad news.
Right.
And as you allow that in, ultimately that begins to shape neural pathways, and that begins to shape that immaterial part of you, so that you now begin to develop, like many of us have, kind of these leanings towards melancholy and paranoia and fear. It's been said, it's not the water outside of the boat that sinks the boat, it's the water that you let in, and we're letting in the bad, and that is unfortunately shaping our minds. We have another verse in our scriptures, Romans 12:2. It says, "Don't be conformed to this world." Right? Don't be conformed. Don't allow the world to squeeze you into its mold, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you might live a life that is a flourishing life. And I think that's more relevant now than it ever was before.
That's awesome. I appreciate where we're at. So, that's a big challenge, right? The mind-body confusion.
Absolutely.
What are a couple? I know there's a couple of other challenges we're going to talk about. What's another one that you've got on your radar?
Yeah, I think the other one is really intimately bound to the first. If we overemphasize our physicality, this life is precious, of course, and we undervalue the soul and eternal things, by default, we are going to have, and this is the way I'll describe it, we will have a thin spirituality. And so, one of the points that I made early on is that we are created. I think we're created, and therefore we have this inseparable relationship with our Creator that needs to be addressed. And so I'm going to be more or less healthy, dependent upon the status and the quality of that relationship. And again, I know not everyone watching or listening is there, but give me a moment and let me try to develop this. For me, what can be more obvious than the fact that we are created? And I get that not all people are there in their faith journey, but bear with me and just think about a couple of things. Like, I don't have to exist, you don't have to exist, and yet out of nowhere, decades ago, for Damon, many decades ago, we just popped into existence, and we find ourselves in this world. And I think if we ask some questions as we observe this world, it leads us to this inevitable conclusion of a creator. For example, just look at your body, right? This is right. The thing that we're so concerned about. And what we find, at least the last count, is some 37 trillion cells in your body. Every one of those cells has dense digital code. It's called DNA. It's the code on the spine of that deoxyribonucleic acid. And if you were to unpack that code from every one of those 37 trillion cells, put them end to end, it would stretch from the earth to the sun at the very least 61 times. Some people say up to 100 times. And consider that code has all of the instructions to make the complicated organism that you are. And when you look at your body and all the organs that make it up and the systems and how they collaborate, that's That's all found in your code. And that code, of course, by itself, it doesn't do anything. And so you have these cells that take the code, take the blueprints for your body, and they make your body. You think Boeing down the road is complicated and amazing. That's
Right.
nothing compared to these little manufacturing centers called the cell. And it
Exactly.
makes you who you are. And that doesn't even account for the ecosystem that you find yourself as an organism, which displays what some people call the Goldilocks phenomena. Everything is just right
Yeah.
for life to exist here. In other words, when I reflect on me, I am immediately brought to the Creator. John Calvin would say it this way. He says, there's not one drop, if you think about it, there's not one drop of goodness that you can't trace back to God. And therefore, he says, the most important issue of life pressing upon us from every place is your relationship with God. And yet we have the temptation to flatten that out.
So in that, we're talking about creator God from our faith basis. Where do, and tis the season right now that we're going to be in. We're celebrating the birth of a biblical character. And maybe you could expand on that and how that may fit into this picture of creation.
Yeah, absolutely. The Christmas story and everyone's singing the tunes, whether or not one is a believer, you're at Target, you're at Kohl's, and, the hymns are playing. What we're hearing is this great story about how God created all things for our good and his glory. And God created all those things to have a relationship with us. And yet things have gone bad, mainly in our relationship with him. He doesn't become the first thing in our lives. We have regarded God the way that C.S. Lewis says an airman regards his parachute. He's glad he has it, but hopes he'll never have to use it. And that's just a fact when we think about God. He's on the margins, right? He's a footnote. We only go to him in crisis or in times of loss. He's not at the very front and center of who we are and what we do. And so you talk about trying to be in alignment with the universe. The way to do that is to be in alignment with your Creator, and that misalignment has happened, and we can't fix that. And so we as Christians, we believe this audacious thing during Christmas that God himself, second person of the Trinity, draws near to us in the closest possible way so that we can draw near to him. It's like an author writing himself into his own novel. And Dorothy Sayers, it said that she would write herself into her novels as this character, Harriet. That's what God has done in Christ. John 1:14, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. And God has done that to establish that relationship back with him.
And in the name of, the name that has been proclaimed, Jesus. And Jesus, if you go to other parts of Scripture where he is the creator as well, it's a mind-boggling reality. The Trinitarian idea, the idea that Jesus could be both God and man, it's a very difficult concept for believers, to really grasp hold of the enormity of that thought, right?
Yeah, I don't even know how this works, right? I really don't know how anything works. And so we're jumping into the complexities and the mysteries of God himself. And it is a mystery, but it is a beautiful mystery in which there's so much hope. And, you talk about health. There is the true restoration of health and peace and life and joy. And that's what God's after. Often people think, well, if I put God first and I make him the number one in my life, then that is a recipe for resistance and floundering rather than flourishing. But nothing can be further from the truth. Jesus says, seek first God and his kingdom, and all those things, all other things in life will fall into place. It's, when you dress in the morning and you got that dress shirt, you don't start from the bottom up. You start with the top button and you work your way down. Otherwise, you become a fashion nightmare. God first, right? God
Right.
first. And so Christ comes to establish that firstness of God in our lives.
Oh, I like that. And you're going kind of top down with the shirt illustration. I'm going to go kind of bottom up and ask you this question. Isn't it, at least reasonable to consider that the most, and this is a health dedicated podcast, and I'm excited to be able to bring people like you to talk about health. But I think it's reasonable to consider spiritual health as the foundation for all health. Any thoughts on that? I mean, to have that foundation of spiritual health is going to build any part of your health strategy to higher levels.
Oh, absolutely. Going back to that mind body relationship, they're synchronized swimmers, they're figure skaters paired up. But in our humanity, like the most important part is the soul, because that's the part where we truly connect with God. Now, the body is amazing as well, and we do have this unique part of our religion, contrary to other religions that sometimes would say that salvation is the escape of the body. We actually say God created the body, created physical things. He said it was good, and salvation is not the escape from the body. It's the redemption of it. God himself taking on a body and then eventually dying and rising again in a body. But that body is a vehicle, right? The body is a glove or maybe skin that covers the bone. And it's that part of the soul, the spirit, that really connects and communes with God through the vehicle of your physicality and through the ecosystem of the universe. I mean, it was all set up to have a relationship. It was all designed to pursue God and for God to be our delight and our joy and our salvation. And, we mess things up, and God is gracious, and Christmas, we celebrate his amazing grace to come and to set things right.
That's awesome. So we're kind of getting close to wrapping up. We're gonna make this a two-part conversation.
Are you sure about that, Damon? Don't do it.
We're going to try to carry on a little bit further in the discussion, but do you want to kind of wrap up where we're at so far, and then we'll kind of get into the next week conversation, and we'll recap as we go into that one.
Yeah, absolutely. It is your heart on this platform, this media platform, to have people experience maximal health, right? To flourish in all aspects of their humanity. And the fact is, it's much more than eating good things and drinking good things and exercising, although that's critical. There's a spiritual component. And so we've been talking about developing that strategy, that overall strategy for health. And it recognizes that we are embodied. We are soul and body. We got to honor that relationship and manage that relationship well. Otherwise, we will tend towards a lack of health. And we are created. We are creatures who therefore have an inseparable relationship with the Creator. And we will be healthy or not healthy, depending upon how we manage that relationship. And so those are the two pieces I would encourage your listeners to think through, to process. And again, wherever they're at in their faith journey, maybe there's no faith yet, consider these ideas. And I hope at the very least to get you thinking a little bit more holistically about your life.
Very good. So I'm very thankful that you joined us today for this part of the conversation.
Thank you so much, Damon. Thank you to your listeners too.
Really appreciate it. And so as we wrap up this part, I'm just going to say, hey, this is a great time of year always to be thankful. So we will come back again next week and continue on the conversation. So thank you, Pastor Jake.
Thank you, Damon.